Thank you very much, Russell. Just caught me taking a sip of my cup of tea that I've made myself just before you came online.
Michael Tellinger has been a long-time scientist and researcher of the origins of humankind and the genetic anomalies of our species. He is a supporter of Zecharia Sitchin and believes man was created using alien DNA to terraform and mine gold on Earth for the Anunnaki. He has written several books including Temples of the African Gods, Slave Species of the Gods, The Secret History of the Anunnaki and Their Mission on Earth, and his latest, African Temples of the Anunnaki, The Lost Technology of the Gold Mines of Enki. Michael Tellinger connects the dots and reveals why humanity is enslaved through the suppression of free energy alternatives and what he calls the absolute tool of control, money. You can learn more about Michael Tellinger's research by visiting michaeltellinger.com. Now, for all you nitwits out there who are about to ask yourselves whether or not he's got a British accent or an Australian one, it's neither, but in fact...
South African, very much.
Right. And you're currently in South Africa?
I am. I'm sitting in my balcony study overlooking the mountains of Mpumalanga, which are absolutely filled to the brim by the ancient ruins left behind by the Anunnaki.
And I'm here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and this conversation, I suppose, is because of alien technology.
Absolutely. And for those people that have not yet read UFO Highway, which is a relatively new book, I highly recommend it. It'll certainly give you a slightly different spin on where we seem to have gotten a lot of our technology from in recent days.
That's Anthony F. Sanchez.
Yeah.
Good friend of mine. Michael, let's start with the basics to the theory behind Nibiru and the Anunnaki, so anyone who isn't yet familiar with it can be brought up to speed. A primer, if you will. And is there a special connection between the Anunnaki and South Africa?
Very much so. You know, you said up front that I'm a supporter of Zecharia Sitchin, and I think many people, millions of people around the world will resonate with that. That there are many detractors of Zecharia Sitchin's work and so forth. So I'd like to just put all these detractors' fears to rest, because there can be no more discussion or doubt about what Sitchin's interpretations were about and the fact that they were actually true. Not all of his interpretations and his translations were true. Everybody makes mistakes. But what we do know now is that what he wrote about Southern Africa, or a place called the Abzu, often misinterpreted by some scholars as hell or the land below earth, which really, I believe, the true interpretation was the land below the equator where the gold came from, and also the places below the earth where the gold was dug. So the fact that we have now uncovered about or more than 10 million mysterious circular stone structures that create a huge network, ancient network of an ancient civilization here in Southern Africa, which includes South Africa and Zimbabwe, that there can be no more doubt that this must have indeed been the so-called Abzu, or the place where the gold came from. And I must also add to that, there's overwhelming evidence that these ancient civilizations, these vanished civilizations that left all these structures behind, were in fact digging gold and mining gold. The Sumerian tablets talk about the Anunnaki gods, and as Zecharia Sitchin correctly actually called them the Anunnaki, the gods of heaven and earth, because that is what they call themselves. And the Sumerian clay tablets are riddled with references of the Anunnaki gods and what they did on earth, their activities. The two main protagonists or activators among the Anunnaki gods, or the Anunnaki, who came from a planet called Nibiru, according to Sitchin and his translations, came to earth some 450,000 years ago looking for gold. And they found it in great quantities. And they started digging it. After they realized that they needed more gold, and they were able to dig out for reasons that remain mysterious and debatable, they decided to clone a new species, a slave species, which they refer to as the Lulu Amelu, or the primitive worker. And to create this new species, knowing the techniques of cloning the way we know it today, they used what seems to be a basic hominid species, possibly something like a Homo erectus, and then another advanced kind of being, either themselves or another advanced being that may have already been present on planet Earth at that stage. And they created this new species called Homo sapien. that doesn't mean that the Homo sapien they created is what Homo sapiens look like today, because there's been many crossbreeding episodes and many more genetic manipulations since that first genetic cloning event. And that is why we have this interesting situation of so many different race groups on our planet. And that in itself is an interesting anomaly to face growing up on this planet. So the Anunnaki came to planet Earth from a planet called Nibiru, which, according to Sitchin and his translations, revolves around the sun every 3,600 years. And there are some interesting connotations or connections to that. Why we have 360 degrees in a circle or an orb in geometry, and from that sense. Zecharia Sitchin is not the only one that has been writing about the Anunnaki and their quest for gold on planet Earth. There have been many other psychics and channelers and seers that have given us great amounts of information, and Ashiana Dean is just one such other person that talks in great detail about the Anunnaki. And I must also tell your listeners at this stage that we cannot underestimate the incredible influence the Anunnaki have had not only on this planet and our species as the human race, on the activities on this planet, not just for hundreds of thousands of years, but actually millions of years, most likely, but not only on this planet or in our solar system, but on the entire galaxy and the entire universe as we know it today. This is becoming more and more evident the more you dig into the activities of the Anunnaki. In fact, for those that have seen or that will see my latest presentation from the Breakthrough Energy Conference in Boulder, Colorado in October 2013, we'll see how I present the evidence of this energy grid that was created around planet Earth and was put in place by the Anunnaki. We now have measurements that we've started making of this energy grid by individual scientists and researchers that have got the technique and the technology to do that. But this information has already been known by the American military and Air Force for decades, this energy grid around planet Earth that they've been referring to as the rules, this energy grid that they call the rules. They often say they don't know where it comes from, but it's always been there.
What are some of the misconceptions about Nibiru or the Anunnaki? I mean, the internet has many contradictory stories.
Yeah, one of the first misconceptions is that they're reptilians, and I must tell you the Anunnaki are not reptilian. What seems to have happened is, when you start, what I must also just, warn against or guide against is, don't just believe everything you read, as you said. The easiest way to tell a lie is to stick as close to the truth as possible. So just do as much research and read as much as you can, and you'll realize that the Anunnaki are definitely not reptilian beings, but they've been connected to the reptilians for other reasons, which could be linked to the split within the Anunnaki hierarchy and pecking order. And it seems when one of Enki's sons by the name of Marduk, who is a huge following on Earth, and it's still possible that he's actually running the affairs on this planet. He's actually the big cheese that runs all the affairs on this planet and controls all the governments. When Marduk split away from the senior Anunnaki and remained on Earth and took control of the affairs here, and he then went into all kinds of deals and agreements with the Draconians and the Reptilians, and started taking control and enslaving humanity, which was not necessarily the initial intention of Enki and Enlil, the senior Anunnaki brothers that sort of set up the gold mining empire here on Earth, and created the split. Many call it the angelic, or the fallen angelics would refer to that. So those are some of the main misconceptions and the very thin line between what may have happened and what could have happened and didn't happen.
Why would the Anunnaki create the human race to mine gold? With their advanced technology, couldn't they just have mined it for themselves?
Of course you can mine gold for yourself. Well, put yourself in a position where you've got great Caesar and laser technology, and you can dig the gold out of the ground, but how much gold are you going to dig if there's 20 or 30 or 60 of you, right? not much, even if you have advanced phaser and laser technology. But if you have 10 million people doing it, you're digging a lot more gold than just 60 of you. So that is why it's a common question I get, and the answers are very simple. You don't fool yourselves. Let's not fool ourselves for 1 second that just because we get advanced technology, and that in itself is a very interesting discussion. What is advanced technology actually? Just because you get advanced technology doesn't mean you can do things on a mass scale under certain limitations, or within a specific environment that dictates specific limitations. And there I speak about the dense reality and the dense environment of consciousness and the dense field that we find ourselves on this planet, the reality we find ourselves in here.
Right, but could they not have just cloned themselves? Why the need to create a hybrid?
Well, they didn't want to do the work. There was a rebellion that's very clearly outlined in Sitchin's work. When the Anunnaki were digging the gold for thousands of years, they didn't just do this and give up within a day or two. They did it for thousands of years until they said, sorry, we've had enough. We're not going to do this hard labor, because they were putting some of their own kind into really treacherous mining conditions. And if you've ever been underground into a mine, you know what I mean. It is not a pleasant place to be. So when their own kind refused to do the work, they realized that they would have to find an alternative to the solution, or to the problem. And the solution was to create a clone, a new species that was smart enough to follow orders, but not smart enough to question its own existence and its own consciousness. It had to have a big enough frontal lobe to follow instructions and follow orders and learn how to handle tools and repeat it over and over again, and also be of high consciousness or conscience to understand fear and to understand the threat of punishment and what would happen to you if you do not follow orders, that you will be punished. And so the enslavement, the creation of the species is really a lot more complex than people would just imagine. It's not something that you just do overnight. Say, oh, we just create a species and they'll do what we tell them to do. It's not that simple. It's obviously, and according to Sitchin's writings, it took them a long time to get the right mix, the right genetic mix, to create the right kind of creature that would perform all these tasks and be the right kind of slave. And boy, did they get it right. Look at us today.
We have an audience contributed question here. On a lot of the Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki characters all seem to be holding a little purse. What are these purse items they are holding?
Good question. Good question. Very good question. That some people believe that it was some sacred, special kind of water or nourishment or energy device, while on the other hand they hold what looks like a pine cone or a cone-shaped tool or an artifact. And it's the combination of those two, I believe, that they show us and indicate very clearly that they manipulated our DNA. And it seems to be, these poses seem to be either bearded men with wings or bird-headed godlike beings with wings that are manipulating a variety of what could be described as encoded or entwined DNA strands. I believe that what they're telling us in those images, that they're taking control of our DNA. They've manipulated our DNA, and they've taken control of our pineal gland, and therefore severed us from the consciousness of, or the unity consciousness of the universal consciousness, so that we cannot think for ourselves and just be nice and stupid and follow orders until we reach enlightenment. And this is critical. This is very important, because there are several references in Sitchin's work specifically where Enki and even Enlil and some of the Anunnaki hierarchy senior members debate with Ninhursag and Nindagizida, the sister and the eldest son, who seems to also have been a geneticist or a medical man. But they discuss the whole philosophy of breaching what today we would call, among the Trekkies, the prime directive, or going against the creator of all and breaching the code of conduct, and discussing whether it would be okay to create this creature, and then deciding that yes, it will be okay, as long as they imbue the creature with a possibility to evolve its own consciousness and one day take their own place alongside their creator or the Anunnaki and not forever be enslaved. So by doing that, they did what, the Star Trek series has been telling us for 50 years now. Do not breach the Prime Directive. And I believe that in there is a huge amount of information, because that ability for us to grow and explode and rise and evolve in consciousness, not necessarily physically. The physical evolution will be a side effect of our consciousness and our genetic evolution is encoded in our DNA. In the 97% of the so-called junk DNA, I believe, as many others do, is actually where this advanced DNA of the Anunnaki has been encoded in. And this is what we are now evolving into. And this is why many geneticists have been coming forward and saying that we're using a lot more of our DNA and rapidly using more of our DNA as the DNA is being activated by the various frequencies that are hitting us from the galactic core as we cross the galactic plane in 2012. Our DNA is exploding with activation, which causes a feedback mechanism, which activates us as human beings into formulating higher thoughts, which activates our own consciousness and contemplation of our own being. Who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we here? And this creates a rapid exponential curve in the consciousness growth among humanity. And it's a very exciting time to be alive, because you can see it. I'm sure you can see it in the work that you're doing, and the people you talk to, and the people you talk to on the street, and the people that respond to your radio show, how this is evolving so rapidly now. It's now on its own. It's out of control now.
Yeah, what people refer to as waking up.
That's right. Enlightenment, the moment of enlightenment, waking up, really reaching high levels of consciousness. And what I've been talking about is what this point of enlightenment really means, because when you talk to people and you ask them about, well, what is enlightenment? Most people start regurgitating, other definitions of it, but they don't really tell you what it is. What is enlightenment? Sitting on a mountaintop meditating? No, that doesn't define what enlightenment is. And I've sort of reached a conclusion that I've been sharing with people, is that it's only when we realize that we've been totally and utterly enslaved in 4 areas of our existence. And the first one is physically, because we've been cloned as a species. We've been enslaved mentally, because our brain has been controlled through controlling our brain and pineal gland and our entire nervous system. We've been controlled emotionally, because it affects our heart and the connection to the spirit and to source, and it confuses us, obviously. And finally, we've been enslaved spiritually, because our souls have been trapped in this involuntary karmic trap that has forced us to relive thousands upon thousands of lives without remembering our past lives, without remembering who we are, where we come from, and why we're here, until we recognize that we've been enslaved in these 4 areas that I've just identified for you. And when that penny drops for you, that we're enslaved beyond any control, only when you recognize that will you be able to reach a point of enlightenment, at which point you will actually, through your own thoughts, knowing that you don't have to come back through an involuntary karmic trap that was created by the Anunnaki through this energetic grid around our planet. And as I said, there is absolute overwhelming evidence that this grid actually exists today, still. That we don't have to come back and relive this insane karmic lives for no reason whatsoever. That we can ascend to beings of high consciousness and rejoin the universe of conscious beings, and then start our journey of helping this planet from a position of higher consciousness, helping those that are still coming out of the darkness and into the light of enlightenment and higher consciousness.
A big part of your research is talking about the suppression of free energy and the power found in crystals.
Absolutely, and once again, this is an amazing journey, because I reached all these conclusions, which are now no more, questionable at all, because I show it scientifically. We've taken measurements in the stone circles in South Africa that I've already said are remains of the Anunnaki gold mining empire, and these stone circles are not dwellings, and they're not cattle corral, They're actually energy-generating devices that create huge amounts of energy by tapping into the sound frequency that emanates from Mother Earth and converting those sound frequencies in gigahertz. Now, this is important what I'm saying here. In gigahertz, into electromagnetic energy and electromagnetic fields. And we know very little about this, just the low-level detection and measurements that I've done. But what I can tell you is that I believe, I haven't seen anything contrary to this or to contradict this, that the measurements we've made in the stone circles here in South Africa are the highest measurements of sound and energy anywhere, measured anywhere in the world in the history of this planet, emanating out of planet Earth, that can be converted into free energy for us today. And it's just a matter of time for us to realize how they did it, what they did. More and more people that are really bright scientists and engineers that are learning about my research are now contacting me through the Breakthrough Energy Movement as well, that I've been connected with. And incidentally, we're going to be holding the next one next year in South Africa, which is really exciting.
Is there an intrinsic... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Russell. What did you say?
I was going to say, is there an intrinsic power found in crystals, rocks, minerals, so forth?
Absolutely. The source, just think about what is the highest level of modern advanced technology that we use today. It's all silica and quartz-based technology. Silicon quartz, Silicon Valley, quartz crystal, silicon chips in the computers. So if you think for a second what ancient sites are made of, they're all made of stone. Well, what does stone contain? Most of the stone on Earth contains between 70 and 95% silica, or quartz. Sometimes it's very dense quartz and very pure silica. Sometimes it's very basic, but it doesn't matter. It's the silica and the quartz component in the rock that gives it its energetic component. It stores information, it conducts light, it conducts sound, and now we're starting to realize that what the ancients did is they didn't have to extract the silica out of the rock and put it into fancy, shiny metal boxes, so they can sell it to somebody. They didn't have money. They didn't work with money. They created the money as a tool of enslavement to keep the dumb slave species enslaved. Among themselves, they utilized their laws of nature and the knowledge of the laws of nature to use the natural power sources and the devices and the silica in the rock for their own benefit. And so what you'll find that all the ancient sites on Earth made out of rock are done so for very specific reasons, because the stone is very powerful, the most powerful energetic technology that we have on this planet, together with water, I must add, together with water.
Now, you say that they're controlling humanity through money, but they themselves are collecting the gold. Now, for them, is it more than just a monetary thing?
The money is just the tool of enslavement. It's not about the money, and I so many times have to remind people, it's not about the money. It's about the control of humanity, and the money is used as a tool to control the people. So don't get confused about these two issues. It's really important that people understand this. So, when people talk about, yes, the banks charge too much interest and all this, and when they're going to lower the interest, stop. You go down the wrong rabbit hole. They've got us so wound up and running around like crazy chickens with our heads cut off, arguing and wondering about the wrong things. It's about the creation of money out of thin air. It's got zero value. It's got absolute control value encoded in it. And those who print the money and supply the money run the world. And those are private families that are of the original royal bloodlines that go back thousands of years. And for those that have seen my presentations will see how I actually support this statement. I don't just talk about it. I'll show you in the clay tablets where they refer to the bloodlines, where they refer to the institution of the first royal bloodline kings on earth, who were also the bankers who ran the first banks from the Sumerian temples. I mean, it's insane. It's just crazy.
I have another audience contributed question here. This is from Grant in South Wales. Did Nibiru play any role in the destruction of Mars or the Great Flood? And will the Annunciation land on Earth when it returns?
I wish I had a clear answer for that. The answer to that is yes, possibly, and possibly not. What seems to be unfolding here is that Nibiru is actually its own little star system, possibly, like a brown dwarf that's attached to another star, which is actually an invisible star. Now, this gets a little weird and esoteric when you start talking about this, but
it got weird a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, for the uninitiated, I'm sorry, but baptism by fire here. So it seems that what they used the gold for is in its monoatomic form, gold has some very interesting properties. Okay, now, and this is a long discussion, as you know, when you start talking about monoatomic gold. And once again, the gold that we dig and we use on Earth, the shiny metal, of which we actually have very little on Earth, there's no evidence that there's any gold on Earth at all, actually. It's all gone. Just go do some research on this. The Anunnaki have been taking the gold off this planet for thousands of years, and they have never stopped. But they use the gold in its monoatomic form, but the reason they get it out from the solid form, because of the density of this planet, they can create huge amounts of monoatomic gold out of that, or almost orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements that come out of the gold atom, or the gold element as we know it on this planet. And it seems that they were using it, one of the properties is that it not only has anti-gravity properties, and it's obviously healing properties. It keeps you forever young, and that's what they use on planet Earth to keep themselves forever young and not age and free of disease and so forth. But critically, this is the most critical part, it also has cladding or cloaking properties where the energy fields of the monoatomic gold actually can shield events or thoughts or attacks from other beings. And this is relatively new information. And it actually comes from a long time ago already, from David Hudson's research in this, where in the trials that he was doing, experiments with the MIT guys, where at about 700 degrees Celsius, the white powder, the little pile of white powder started to disappear and just vanished from sight. And by the time it reached 800 degrees Celsius, it was gone. So therein lies a very interesting and important aspect of the monoatomic gold. So I believe they shielded their planet. And this is where Zachariah Sitchin misinterpreted, didn't give us false information, but misinterpreted what he read, because he didn't necessarily understand the monoatomic gold very clearly. Maybe he did, but he says where they crushed the gold into the finest powder and suspended it in the heavens to protect their planet from cosmic activity and cosmic rays and blah, 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 right? I believe what that actually meant is that they crushed the gold into the finest powder, which was not a powder form that we think, which is actually a transmutated form of the gold and not crushed into nanoparticles, for example, and then suspended that monoatomic gold around their planet to clad their planet so that their activities on planet Earth would not be detected by beings of higher consciousness. And it is that monoatomic gold that actually created that first energetic grid around planet Earth. It is also possible, however, that they could have used nanoparticles of gold, because there's been some really interesting developments with using gold as nanoparticles mixed with synthetic DNA. And what happens when you mix nanoparticles with DNA, it creates this incredible lattice, like this nano sheath of material, of DNA. So you've just created a cybergenetic organism by using nanogold and DNA, and the DNA is indestructible. Every time you break it in that form, every time you break it or there's a tear in it, the DNA and the gold nanoparticles automatically fix the breach or the break. That's an interesting discovery, and this has been a great article that you can go back and look at in, I think, Science or Nature. It was published about 6 years ago about these experiments.
Yeah, with the suspended gold, it reminded me of chemtrails with the aluminum that they pump into the atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we've got some experience with that's happening around us right now, but I think the Anunnaki were dealing with it at a much higher level and a much higher understanding of the full spectrum of activities in the universe, which is way beyond most people's comprehension at this stage.
A lot of people believe that Fort Knox is empty, and of course a couple of years ago they ripped off Libya for all their gold. Is the New World Order, or the Illuminati as people put it sometimes, are they working for the Anunnaki?
In my mind, there's no doubt that that's what it is. I think it's all the split between Enlil, Enki, and then Marduk, who remained on Earth and took over Egypt. He basically took over Egypt from the ancient Anunnaki activity there, and then turned it into what we see as the modern Egypt, which is sold to the tourists when you go to Egypt. You know, I call it the Disneyland of deception. That's what Egypt is. And that's where Marduk stepped in and started taking control of this planet some, 3000 BC, maybe before that. But it actually goes back before that even when, and I believe that the real shenanigans and control of humanity probably started shortly after the flood, I guess some 12,000 years ago or whenever that may have been. That's still open for debate, I suppose. After the flood, when they had to restart some of the mining activity, but at that point they started mining in much wider parts of the world, not just South Africa, but in the Americas and all over Asia as well, and so forth. And you start seeing activities of other ancient civilizations suddenly explode overnight, and all of them are rich in gold, extremely rich in gold. All these ancient cultures are all rich in gold, and whenever you ask them, when the conquistadors ask the ancient populations, where does all your gold come from? They say it belongs to the gods. The gold belongs to the gods. So your question, why is Fort Knox empty? Because the gods have been taking the gold of this planet for thousands of years, and there's no reason why they should stop. Just because we don't know about it doesn't mean it's not going on. Just because we don't know, just because they don't show rockets being launched and satellites being launched into space doesn't mean it's not happening. Satellites are being put into space all the time, but it's not on the news, and yet there's a new satellite up there every second bloody week.
I don't know if you can help the audience member with this question, but for our last question from an audience member today, are there spaceships hiding behind the moon?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. The moon has been a strategically positioned satellite around planet Earth from which the control mechanisms and the control tools have been launched to control planet Earth in many respects. Frequencies that are broadcasting from the moon that are bombarding planet Earth, mind control frequencies that control the weather patterns, frequencies that control earthquakes, and it's incredible. The moon is a very important part in this whole control mechanism of planet Earth, no doubt about it.
Tell us about the Ubuntu Global Community Village and what it is you do there.
Yeah, well, you see that this is interesting because I wouldn't have thought about Ubuntu unless I've been studying the ancient civilizations and where we come from, because I realized at some stage that the Anunnaki didn't use money. It's only when we start dealing with humans, suddenly money appears. So I realized that money was introduced as a tool of enslavement to control humanity. And here we are. That was introduced through the royal bloodlines when the Anunnaki appointed the first priest kings from amongst the humans to control the humans and give them fierce weapons and so forth. So I realized that since money is a tool of control, the only way we're going to overcome it and get out of this enslavement, absolute enslavement, is to stop using money. You cannot be controlled if you don't use their tools of enslavement. So the whole philosophy of Ubuntu is to create communities, make people realize that money is a tool of control, so let's stop using that tool of control and start living and creating things as living, breathing human beings, not legal fictions or persons or citizens, but living, breathing human beings that are divinely created, part of a much bigger plan that we could possibly imagine, which is unraveling very quickly as you start looking into this interesting thing, that we actually have the potential encoded in our DNA to be gods and creators or co-creators of our own reality and our own universe. And so the whole Ubuntu movement is to move people off the using money and start taking control of our own future and our own reality and creating communities, united communities where people live in unity instead of conflict, where people live in harmony and cooperation and cooperate towards the greatest benefit for everyone, as opposed to conflict and competition, which we're told is very good for us, which is the absolute biggest, one of the big lies. So Ubuntu communities are united communities where people live without money, where everybody contributes their God-given talents or acquired skills for the greatest benefit of everyone in their community. People control themselves. They set up what you would call, I guess, a tribal council that decides on a daily basis what's best for the community, as voted and decided by the people. And you realize how quickly you create a community of abundance that we can't even begin to imagine, because money is no longer a hurdle to any kind of progress. If we want to build a rocket to go to Mars, we'll build a rocket to go to Mars. If we need a new bridge, we build the bridge. We don't have to go to bankers to ask them for money to build the bridge, because money does nothing. Money doesn't make the world go round. People make the world go round. People grow the food, plant the seeds, solve the mathematical equations, build the bridges and the free energy devices. Money does nothing. It's created as a tool of a hurdle towards progress and a tool of obstruction to create scarcity on planet Earth and keep people enslaved. So it's a very simple proposal, but it takes a while for some people to wrap their heads around it. Some people get it immediately. And that is the most exciting thing that I can tell you, is that once you start thinking about it, it becomes like a little splinter in your mind, as Orpheus says, that will not leave you alone, because you either struggle with it and you keep struggling with it, but you know that there's something in it, or you resolve the situation or the problem and you join the Ubuntu movement and realize how simple this transition can be.
Michael, tell the audience about your various websites and the best place for them to purchase your latest book, African Temples of the Anunnaki, The Lost Technologies of the Gold Mines of Enki.
Yeah, look, my main website is michaeltellinger.com. That's where you'll find out about my research into ancient civilizations. But unfortunately, that now crosses over with the Ubuntu and what I call contributionism philosophy. So please go on there and subscribe to my articles and my newsletters. And then the Ubuntu Liberation Movement website, which is now also a political party in South Africa, and we will be contesting the election in South Africa next year. For those that are curious about that. And it's very interesting, because I did my first 1-hour interview yesterday morning on one of the largest national mainstream radio stations in South Africa. It was very interesting. I must tell you that the response was overwhelmingly positive. Not one negative caller out of about 20 callers. It blew me away.
So you could become the next president of South Africa? What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm running for president next year. I know it sounds silly, but it's true.
No, it's incredible. Good for you.
Yeah. So the Ubuntu Party website is, there are actually two websites. There's ubuntuparty.org.za, and then we've created a platform for people to communicate and share, and that's called ubuntuplanet.org, Ubuntu Planet. But join the Ubuntu Party, join the Ubuntu movement. It's not just for South Africans. We have members in 168 countries as I speak to you right now.
And the best place to purchase your latest book?
I guess go to Amazon. Go to Amazon. But just also to tell you, this is really important, my new book that deals with this whole Ubuntu contributionism thing, that explains it in great detail, very simply explains the origins of money, how we've been conned into the slavery. That book is called Ubuntu Contributionism, A Blueprint for Human Prosperity. And that book is in layout as we speak. It should be available as an ebook within the next week or 10 days. So please keep watching my website and the Ubuntu website. We'll be posting the links for the ebook downloads there within the next 10 days, I guess. And it's about 370 pages, but it reads like a novel. Wow.
What a brilliant guest. Thank you so much for being on the program today, Michael.
It's a great pleasure, Russell, and it's great talking to you, and I trust we can do it again.